Mr. President, I've had the honor of being the ranking Democrat for the United States Senate on the Helsinki Commission. I work with Senator Wicker, who is the Senate chairman of the Helsinki Commission. The two of us have worked very hard on many issues, and the Helsinki Commission, as I'm sure everyone here knows, is the implementing arm for the U.S. participation in the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the OSCE. It's probably best known for its human rights basket. It does deal with security, military security. It does deal with economic and environmental security. But I think it's best known for its human rights and the impact that human rights have on the security of the OSCE region. In March of this year, the president of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, Mr. Cardin, appointed me to serve as the Assembly's first special representative on anti-Semitism, racism, and intolerance. Since that time, I have focused my work on the urgent issue of anti-Semitism and community security, anti-Muslim bigotry, and discriminatory policing. So let me share with my colleagues the work that I've done this year on behalf of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly and on behalf of, I think, all members of the Senate. My appointment came after horrific back-to-back terror attacks in Paris and Copenhagen in January and February. In both instances, Jewish institutions were targeted, a kosher supermarket in Paris and a synagogue in Copenhagen. And in both instances, some symbol associated with free speech was also attacked. In Paris, a murderous rampage was unleashed against the French satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo. In Copenhagen, a conference on free speech was attacked where a Danish cartoonist was among the speakers. I subsequently visited both cities along with Senator Wicker and Representative Adderholt, fellow members of the Helsinki Commission. Following our trip, I authored Senate provisions to increase State Department funding to combat anti-Semitism and other forms of discrimination in Europe, and co-sponsored Senator Menendez's resolution on anti-Semitism. That resolution supports national strategies to combat and monitor anti-Semitism and hate crimes, including training law enforcement and collecting relevant data. I am pleased that our State Department has advanced many of these efforts outlined in these legislative provisions through the OSCE and civil society's initiatives. I've also focused on the problem of discriminatory policing. This summer, Hungary's Commissioner for Fundamental Rights issued an important report on community policing in Hungary's second largest city, Miskolc. He concluded that police had participated in mass raid-like joint controls executed and with local government authorities, public utility providers, and other public institutions without explicit legal authorization and predominantly in segregated areas inhabited mostly by Roma. In short, police targeted Roma for harassment, fines, and daily indignities. For those of us who have listened to Attorney General Holder present the Department of Justice's report on Ferguson last March, the Hungarian Commissioner's report has the feeling of déjà vu. Many differences, to be sure, but similar to that, critical community confidence in law enforcement has been abused and damaged. I have sought to address these issues with several pieces of legislation, including S-1610, officially named the Baltimore Act, Building and Lifting Trust in Order to Multiply Opportunities and Racial Equality, and S-2168, the Law Enforcement Trust and Integrity Act. Among other provisions, these laws would ban racial profiling by state and local law enforcement, establish mandatory data collection and reporting, and address the issues of police accountability and building trust between police departments and their communities by providing incentives for local police organizations to voluntarily adopt performance-based standards to reduce misconduct. In the OSCE, where discriminatory policing issues have been documented, from the United Kingdom and France to Russia, I have urged the chair in office to hold a high-level meeting on racism and xenophobia focused on concrete action. Mr. President, following the most recent tragedies in Paris, as well as San Bernardino, there has been a backlash of hatred directed against asylum seekers, immigrants, and Muslims in many OSCE countries, often fueled by populist or extremist parties such as Le Pen in France, the UKIP in Great Britain, the True Finns in Finland, Swedish Democrats, Australian Freedom Party, or the Golden Dawn in Greece. Worse still, this kind of xenophobia bleeds into the discourse of mainstream parties. As such, I will add an increased focus on prejudice and discrimination linked with migration and refugees crisis to my priorities. So, Mr. President, in addition to focusing on anti-Semitism and discriminatory policing and the anti-Muslim backlash, I will also look at the protection of migrants and refugees, as that's becoming an area of discrimination troubling in the OSCE region, including in our own country, the United States. I am particularly troubled by the spike in violence in our own country directed at houses of worship and community centers fueled by escalating anti-Muslim discourse. In Palm Beach, Florida, vandals broke all the windows in the Islamic Center, ransacked the prayer room, and left bloody stains throughout the center. That cannot be tolerated in our country. A number of mosques have been reported receiving death threats and messages of hate. A pig's head was thrown at a Philadelphia mosque. Shots were fired at a mosque in Connecticut, and a fake bomb was left in a Virginia mosque not far from where we are here today in the United States Capitol. I disagree in the most emphatic way possible with those who would have us call for excluding people from this country based on their faith and limiting political participation based on religion. That's not who we are. That's not our values. The images of Jewish refugees on the SS St. Louis turned away port after port, many of whom ultimately perished in death camps. The image of American citizens, including children in prison and internment camps solely because of their race, are dark corners of our own history. We must be careful to not retread that same path. It is one reason I question those who describe terrorism as a Muslim problem. Such statements prevent our communities from working together against a common threat. The slaughter of school children in Columbine, the massacre of churchgoers in Charleston, and the Oklahoma City bombings were not white problems, just because the perpetrators were white. Neither should the attacks in Paris and San Bernardino be distilled simply as Muslim problems. Radicalization is a very real problem that currently tries to exploit the Muslim community, but it is our problem. Muslims, Jews, Christians, whites, Latinos, blacks, Europeans, Americans, to come together, all Americans, to solve this problem. When I see young people who engage in these horrible acts, I question why they were susceptible to such great untruths that would allow them to harm themselves and others. No family should have to lose its mother, son, or cousin to mass shootings. No family should have to live with the fear that a loved one were the perpetrators of mass violence. We must work together to guard against such ideologies that would steal our young people from us. Given that the United States is historically a nation built upon immigration and the tenets of religious freedom, Americans have long lived alongside each other and have seen people of different faiths live together in peace. Muslims have lived in America since colonial days and have served under the command of George Washington. There is an estimated 5,900 Muslims who currently serve in the United States Armed Services, defending our country and defending our way of life. When the Supreme Court ruled this summer in favor of a young Muslim woman who allegedly had suffered employment discrimination because of her headscarf, Justice Scalia announced the 8-1 decision of that court, noting, and I quote, "This is really easy." And he was referring to the fact that neither immigrants nor Muslims are new to our shores. Islam is also not new in Europe. Europe's own historic relationship with the rest of the globe has set the stage for ties that have long served as a backbone for prosperity for the Western world. Europeans have created a presence throughout the world, and that is a two-way street. Many countries in the OSCE region, including our own, therefore have a learned history of integration that can be useful in addressing the increasing diversity stemming from the refugees and changing demography. Given the conflict that have forced mass displacement and migration, we should support long-term inclusion and integration efforts at the national, regional, and local levels throughout the OSCE region, especially with the leaders of the humanitarian efforts for Syria and other refugees such as what is being done today in Turkey and Germany, Sweden, Austria, and the OSCE partner states such as Jordan and Lebanon. They're taking on tremendous burdens of the refugees because they know it's the right thing to do. They need partners, including the United States. The successful integration of immigrants and refugees, including access to quality housing, education, employment, and public services, facilitates meaningful intellectual, economic, and other contributions of migrants and refugees that are especially critical for our children. They're helping to build our great country. These are areas in which our nation should exchange experts and information. Earlier this year, I introduced provisions in the Senate for a joint action plan between the United States and the European Union to formalize and coordinate public and private sector anti-discrimination and inclusion efforts. We need diverse coalitions working together to address momentous threats we face today. This includes leading by example and providing factual information about refugees and immigrants and publicly addressing narratives of hate. It is in that spirit that I will continue to work with other parliamentarians and with the administration to combat anti-Semitism, racism, and other forms of intolerance in the United States and elsewhere in the OSCE region. I will do that as the special representative of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, and I will do that as a United States Senator.